My first thought was the legacy that Dad could leave, because anyone who has this medical diagnosis in the future, if it happens with Dad, they'll have options. Not that they want to end their life, but they have the option to do that. And I just thought, what a phenomenal legacy to leave.
The Completed Life Initiative presents Voices of the Completed Life. In each episode, we share unprecedented conversations at the heart of the human experience. Our hosts dive into honest dialogue about mortality, loss, and grief, as we hear firsthand from individuals who seek to avoid life-limiting maladies in a body that may no longer serve them, and who instead aim to celebrate their lives as completed. These are stories that may challenge and surprise you. These stories are worth listening to. These are Voices of the Completed Life. Our host for this episode, Dr. Lewis Cohen, MD, is an advisor to the Completed Life Initiative who brings expertise in the psychiatric aspects of end-of-life care. Recipient of the Eleanor and Thomas Hackett Memorial Lifetime Achievement Award, as well as numerous honors for his writing, Dr. Cohen is completing his third nonfiction book for the public, Winter's End, about a young man with Alzheimer's who hastened his death. This episode is the second part of the story of Gayle Garlock, a man diagnosed with Lewey Body Dementia who legally accessed medical aid in dying in Victoria, Canada in 2019. In part one, we spoke to Gayle's wife, Barbara, as well as Gayle's MAiD provider, Dr. Stefanie Green, about the legal, clinical, and ethical challenges he faced in accessing MAiD with a dementia diagnosis. In this episode, we spoke to Geoff Garlock, one of Gayle's three sons, who provided us with insight into who Gayle was as a father, husband, and person. We will also hear once again from Barbara to dive deeper into how Gayle's death resonates with her to this day. Both Geoff and Barbara help us paint a picture of how Gayle's MAiD impacted his family and community, both before and in the years since his death. We now return to Lou Cohen's conversation with Geoff, with Barbara chiming in from time to time.
Well, let's talk about your dad and your mom and your family. Why don't you just give me a brief account of who you guys all are?
Okay, I'll go back a bit. So, my parents, I'm sure you're aware, they were draft dodgers from the Vietnam War, and they initially came to Edmonton, and that's where my two older brothers were born. So I was the only one born in Halifax. Growing up in Halifax was great. We loved it. I just remember moving in grade 5. I wasn't too happy. I don't think any of my brothers were. But all through everything, like, I don't want to give you too long of a family history, but I guess through everything and through talking to my friends, I've been extremely lucky to have a close, loving, supportive family. And it's weird. I hear other friends of mine, their parents and pressures they may have put towards things. Oh, you can't do that, can't do this. Like, they were always open-minded. Even now I'm thinking of even gender roles. I remember, like, my dad always washed the dishes. I always thought dads wash dishes. And I remember when I talked to other friends, your dad washes the dishes? I'm going, yeah, doesn't yours? And just how, I don't want to say they brainwashed me in a positive way.
Uh, and can you give me a little bit more of a flavor of your dishwashing dad?
He was such a warm person. I guess it's weird when he passed. I had a lot of my friends from Halifax say how he was just a kind, gentle, warm person. I guess, again, I'm going to the brainwashing things. Little things like he jogged a lot, and I'm sure my mom told you the marathons he ran. I didn't realize, like, he would come home from work and he would jog. He'd maybe jog for a half hour. Probably for about a good 22 years, I've been jogging, and I would jog 5 or 6 days a week. And I'll go out in any weather. My wife sometimes go, "You crazy?" And I'll go, "Oh no, my dad did it. It's fine." And I've learned when you jog, once you're out 5 minutes, your body warms up, you're fine. But just setting that silent example, so to speak.
Alzheimer's came
Yep.
into his life.
Yep.
How did it manifest itself? What did you see?
2014, he was diagnosed. And I remember his mom told us it can be a slow, gradual decline. And I would say because he passed in 2019, up until about 2017, you didn't see as many changes. Like you saw little things like a bit forgetful. I would think old age, you forget things. I'm starting to forget things. I would see that. But then around 2017, you notice the lack of physical movement. And this was my dad prided himself on being in shape and jogging. He never boasted openly about it, but it's a source of pride for him, just like it is for me. And like he wasn't able to run as much. He wasn't as active. And I would talk to mom and hear these things. You could tell he was tired. And then at around 2017, like the drop was gradual, but then poof, it really started to drop. Yeah, the Parkinson's also came in with the Lewy body dementia too. You noticed a bit of the shaking, like eating. And again, I'm talking about 2017 on. Before 2017, I didn't notice any major things. I was probably being ignorant and thinking, oh, like it'll be maybe 20 years and it'll be like this. But then 2017, you noticed it. And also talking to mom, how she was having to be a caregiver more than a wife. And you saw more things and the toll it was taking on her.
He had spoken about end of life issues. He had spoken about what he was prepared to tolerate, what he was not prepared to tolerate.
Yeah, reading brought him so much joy. I remember, I don't know, you must know the New Yorker magazine.
Sure.
And he used to buy it when I was younger. This is back in Toronto. And then I clued in finally one Christmas, why don't I buy him a subscription and save a bit of money? He would, but he loved that. My mom said that's the best gift he ever gave him. Like he enjoyed to read, even when he was young. Reading was an escape from him, for difficult situations. And I remember after 2017, mom would tell me he looks at the New Yorker, but he really isn't comprehending it or able to read it. And during the final couple of months, like I would read him articles from the New Yorker. So reading was such a fundamental part of his enjoyment of life. And I think once he couldn't read, that would have been a key point for him. I'm wondering about the physical activity. I think the physical activity too, because when he couldn't jog anymore, he biked a lot. And then unfortunately, he fell off his bike a couple times. But that physical activity, I think, also defined him greatly. More so the reading, though, definitely. And not being able to do that because it just gave him so much enjoyment. And he never, I don't think he specifically said it to me. This is through talking to mom.
Intolerable things for him included the reading, especially, but also the diminishment in his physical activities. But I also wanted to know about the extent to which he spoke with you about end of life issues, if at all.
To be honest, he hardly did. Most of the conversations were with mom, and dad was there, of course. I guess I link it to after 2017. I saw the burden it was placing on my mom to care for him, and I think he realized he was a burden. Now, he was doing this for himself, and you talk to Dr. Green, he had to give consent that he was doing this. This was his wishes. I don't know if she would say this, but I would think taking care of dad for that last bit, I was afraid that that was taking years off of her life because of all the stress. Not, I would say the emotional more than the physical. And the fact that she supported him and did everything until the very end, my goodness, I wonder if I'd be able to do that.
Unrelated, but it will give you some background information. My mother had Alzheimer's. She died in 2007. By the time she died, and unfortunately, she had to go to the end of the road. She didn't even know her name. She certainly didn't know whom I was or who my father was. But my father did something that was so courageous. My parents had a wonderful marriage, and he was devoted to her. In her last years, they were living in an assisted living facility. In early June of 2007, she fell and broke her hip. And when they wanted to operate on her hip, he refused permission. At that point, hospice became involved, and she was put on morphine, sufficient so that she was essentially unconscious, sufficient so she felt no pain from her broken hip. And so for about a week, and I at that point flew to be with them, she didn't eat and didn't drink. She was on the morphine and unconscious and died. I so admire my father for having the courage to have found a legal way in the States. They lived in Arizona at the time, but it was a legal way for her life to end because at that point, her life had no meaning. From that experience, and my parents had always been very open about talking about their wishes. My mom was very, very clear that she would have wanted no part of the life she had. But our family had been very open in talking about quality of life and death. And so, certainly at that time, Gayle and I had very serious discussions about this subject. And that was maybe one reason why Gayle was quite accepting of the idea of a medically assisted death when he knew what his future would be.
And also, of course, you had been rehearsed in some ways by both that experience with your mother and father, but also then the conversations that the two of you, that Gayle and you had had.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Let me ask a bit about religion and whether religion had played any role in your lives leading up to this and whether it has surfaced as an issue since then.
No, I was raised as a Lutheran. I attended church, was in the church choir, youth group, that kind of thing through high school. For Gayle, it was the same, although he was a Methodist. He wasn't in the choir, and that was a good thing. But we were married in a church by a Lutheran minister, probably because that mattered to my grandmother especially. But otherwise, we as a couple did not attend church. Our children did not attend Sunday school. So neither of us had religious reasons for feeling that this might not be proper. Both of us understood that there are people who would oppose this for religious reasons. One of my daughters in law is probably uncomfortable with it for religious reasons, but she respected Gayle's right to make that decision, my supporting that decision, and her husband, my son's right to support that decision. But I think for her, maybe it's a little bit harder. My other sons do not practice any religion, nor do my grandsons. So certainly in my immediate family, religion was not a factor.
Yeah. Can we hone down then on when a date was set? I know it came somewhat unexpected for your mom, but when a date was set, how involved were you, your brothers?
Mom had set the date because the dad's decline was becoming so severe to the point where, like, I remember coming out and you could not leave dad alone in the house because if he fell, something could happen. Mom, we knew it was being considered, and mom, I guess, had told us about it. And once we knew the date was coming, we wanted to be there when it happened. My brothers and I planned. So we didn't really, it would have been communication by phone. But once we knew that date, we were going to come out a week before to support both our parents and support each other.
And
So,
did that in fact happen?
oh yeah, we came out the week before. I think it was a week before, and just to have time with dad. Although by that point, I like to say maybe you could get dad for an hour during the day, like he'd be there, but aware, knowing what you were talking about. Like we talked a lot about memories. Like it was amazing his memory for events from his youth, but recent things obviously he couldn't recall. But the other parts of the day, I felt like he'd be sitting there in a bit of a daze. But even to get that hour and to share memories and to laugh and to let him know how much we had meant to him, or yeah, he meant to us, sorry, and other way around too. But yeah, I think again, my older brother Mike, I know he had after the initial diagnosis, one thing which he did, I know he wrote a long letter to my dad just saying how lucky he was to have him as a dad, etc. I guess I would have said those things, but I know mom all said that dad was really grateful for that letter because he still would have had the mental capacity to be aware what was in that letter. So this would be 2014. I think my dad was aware of things. I wish I had done that then. Because again, maybe I was being too hopeful with it and not the realization how cruel it could be.
And how you could lose him before he even died.
Yeah, I would say it's weird. My grandma on my dad's side, she has Alzheimer's, and she had a really bad case where I think the final year or two before she died, she couldn't recognize my dad, her own son. Like my dad would visit and she would think, oh, this nice man's coming to visit me. Yeah, I was scared of that. And I didn't realize, how much you would have it for, or how long you'd be able to have the normal dad, so to speak. Sorry, that may not be the correct terminology, but my dad, as I remembered him from when I was young, and be able to talk about articles in the New Yorker, et cetera, and do things like that.
Now, there is no correct terminology. It is really a baffling situation to have this person in front of you who is not quite the same person who you grew up with.
Yeah, it's weird because I remember with my grandma, like I saw times of her having Alzheimer's, like effect Alzheimer's had on her, but I try to remember the grandma who made great sugar cookies, who I remember asking to come kiss me goodnight. And so maybe I've blocked out some of that stuff with dad at the end. I want to remember the dad from when I was young, the dad who was phenomenal and everything I could have asked for in a dad. And obviously, I don't think dad would obviously want me to remember how it was at the end. And maybe the human brain just blocks out those negative and tries to focus on the warm memories.
Can you tell me, from your perspective, about what happened when Dr. Green came?
Dr. Green came. She needed to talk to dad once more for him to have consent right before the procedure. There was a nurse also there and just briefed us on the procedure, how where we'd want to do it. There's needles put in him, so we were all in their bedroom. Dad was lying on the bed, mom was beside him, and we were at dad's feet. A lot of tears. I remember dad saying, I love you all so much. I remember this after the injection, his skin went pale, like you almost saw it happen right there. And so we stayed there while Dr. Green, who was fabulous in the whole process, the whole procedure, whenever I'd seen her, she's a hero. We talk about heroes, and I don't use that word lightly, but for what she's doing and what she is enabling the choice for people to have. We'd left the room, and I think that's when my brothers and I guess have different emotions in response. I really hadn't cried hard until after that moment, and I remember I was bawling and I was in my middle brother's arms. My older brother came over too, and he was crying too. And it was only maybe 5 minutes we were bawling, and mom came out. After, I guess, the initial shock and the realization that your dad's not there anymore, was the sense of relief. And I know my mom has talked about this a lot. The relief for her that nothing horrible, that he wouldn't pass in a way that would have been cruel and harmful. And my brothers and I all agreed with that. And then I think there was the relief that, hey, we were able to do this. We were able to get done.
You're listening to Voices of the Completed Life, a podcast brought to you by the Completed Life Initiative. Learn more about the Completed Life Initiative and donate to our cause at www.completedlife.org. We provide groundbreaking presentations about the right to control one's own end-of-life experience. We explore legislative options for expanding the eligibility criteria for medical aid in dying within the United States and look to other countries around the globe in support of the right to die. We empower people to ask, what does it mean to live a completed life? Spread the word about the completed life on social media by using #CompletedLife. And now, back to our episode.
So let's get to where we kind of left things off, which was you had a good cry.
Yep.
You stepped out of your parents' room.
Yep.
Your brothers had a good cry.
Yep.
Take me from there.
Then eventually mom came out. It was unusual because the people had to come, it wasn't medical researchers, to take his body because I don't know if you're aware, he had donated, my dad had agreed to have his brain donated to conduct Alzheimer's research. So the medical people who ever came and then took his body. Which again, yeah, I'll admit I couldn't go back into the room after they had done the procedure because he was there and it was maybe a half hour, but I had trouble going back into the room. I think before they took my dad's body, Mom went and said goodbye to him. Yeah, I couldn't handle it. So they took the body. And then I guess that when he was gone was, yeah, the full realization. You could tell the relief on my mom's face. Definitely, you could tell like that. Wow, okay, we were able to do that. There was some sorrow, but I think it was much more for her the relief about how dad wouldn't have wanted to see that decline and what his life would have become. I'm sure they had told you that dad was having his remains cremated once they used his brain for the research. And even ironically now, because dad had wanted his ashes put in three places. One was Halifax. Ironically, he spent very little of his life in Halifax, but it was just such a community, and I still have fond memories of it. So we haven't done that yet. One was in Souk. That's a place near Victoria. It's a provincial park, which he often hiked in. And the other is the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. That's where my parents met. And we haven't done that yet. But here in Souk, like I did it with my mom once. And yesterday, my middle brother, Chris, he hadn't been out here for a while. He's here. So we had gone to Souk and he had went with his two sons and put some of dad's ashes in the water there too. Yeah, it's ironic that it's still there. And even I think about it now, like I know my two nephews, they seemed a bit, maybe they weren't warned about it, but it was sort of a bit weird for them. And so I was talking with them and they were going, yeah, it's weird that I may have saw a bone there and it had a little bit of bone in the cremation and gone. And I go, yeah, but this is one of the places Pa wanted to be. They call him Pa. And yeah, I was telling my brother to make sure to talk with them last night. But I hope to go to Halifax this summer, and I think I may take some of the ashes and put it in a park there, which he often jogged. Yeah, so after that, yeah, the cremation, Mom still has some of the ashes. Rocky Mountain's going to be tough. Rocky Mountain National Park, because none of us have been there for a while, but I'm hoping that my brothers and I, we can go do a long hike with that and do it.
And what did you perceive to be the reaction of your family, including the more extended family, including your close acquaintances, to how Gayle had died?
I guess when we first heard it, there was a degree of shock. I've had a very fortunate life, and I've just had friends who have been through a lot. And I don't know why, for some reason, in the back of my mind, I always thought, I can't be this lucky. Like, something's got to happen. And this is pure ridiculous superstition, maybe. I don't know, but I thought, okay, maybe, hey, this happening to dad. I don't think I was aware of how much time I would have left. Like, obviously, you have that regret, but I was thinking, oh, dad's always been healthy. It'll be fine. It'll be, maybe he'll live till 80, 85. And so, yeah, maybe I treated it a bit casually, think that he'd be okay until I noticed the signs of decline. Later on, my first reaction when they talked about end of life. Now, so again, when they were first diagnosed, they didn't talk about having MAiD. I don't think anything, but when MAiD entered the picture, they sat us down individually and talked with us. And my first thought was the legacy that dad could leave, because anyone who has this medical diagnosis in the future, if it happens with dad, they'll have options. Not that they want to end their life, but they have the option to do that. And I just thought, what a phenomenal legacy to leave. I teach law in high school, and I know some Canadian cases dealing with Alzheimer's, Lewey Body Dementia, some of the pioneers who had that and opened the door for others just to have the option.
Our sons were supportive from the time we told them that he was thinking of this. I believe that one of our sons may have found it a little more difficult than the other two. And that's just personality, perhaps. But certainly all three were accepting and I would say grateful. Our friends, we did not tell many people at all that Gayle was considering this because he could have changed his mind. It might not have happened. When Gayle wrote the application that he had to submit, that application had to be witnessed. And so there were two friends, a husband and wife. Actually, the friend who had told me about Mary Wilson's death, they were well aware of what was going on. There were another couple, neighbors who were close friends, who we told what was probably likely to happen. And there were two neighbors, one who lived on either side of us, who I did tell a day or two beforehand, because they would be wondering when they saw Gayle's body taken away a couple of days later. So I did warn them. There were a couple of friends, maybe 3, that we had known for 50 years or more, that did not live near us. But I did email them and said this was likely to happen. But I did stress that it was possible it might not happen if Gayle changed his mind. And I didn't know for sure if Gayle would change his mind. I mean, the courage it must take to... Gayle was not in physical pain. Certainly he was in psychological pain. I don't doubt that. But he was not in physical pain. And the courage it must take to say to the doctor, yes, go ahead, start the procedure. That's beyond my understanding. And had Gayle, even at that last moment, changed his mind, I could have understood that.
Uh-huh. The repercussions, if any, I was going to say, but there had to be, the repercussions for you, for the family, for this unusual kind of death, because your dad was a pioneer.
Yep.
When it came to making use of MAiD for somebody who had a dementing illness. Tell me about those repercussions. Were there any that you can sort of put your finger on?
No, I can't really think of any serious repercussions as you asked that, because as you asked, I was going, no.
I have not had to deal with anyone who wasn't supportive of his decision.
Now, I am curious about whether an obituary was written, published about Gayle's death, and I'm curious as to whether it alluded to the assisted dying.
There was no obituary in the newspaper. He was clear he did not want an obituary. The University of Toronto contacted me maybe 2 or 3 weeks after his death and asked if I would write an obituary for Gayle. And I wrote a joyful obituary, not what they expected at all. Well, I'll give you an example. In that obituary, I told them about our first date. Both of us were working in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. Our first date was a hike up Specimen Mountain. We started at Milner Pass, 10,000 feet or so. It was not a climb. It was a hike up a mountain that was 12,500 feet tall. So we were at altitude. Well, Gayle started off at a pretty fast pace. He was probably trying to show me how fit he was. I struggled to keep up. Within 5 minutes, I knew there was no way I could keep up with this guy. So I had to figure out a way to slow him down. And I did. I told him that I had a heart murmur. That was how our relationship began, with that light lie, because it did slow him down. And I included in this obituary, if you want to call it that, for the University of Toronto, I included that little anecdote. I included other things about how he would bake brownies for the neighborhood kids. I told them things that they didn't know about Gayle. They knew his professional accomplishments. I didn't need to tell them that. They knew that better than I did. So I did write an obituary for them. When I saw what they eventually published, they didn't use it, and I didn't care. The other, I'll call it an obituary that I wrote, after his death, well, before he died, I had promised him that I would do what I could to get the message out that a person with a dementia diagnosis could still have a medically assisted death. And you are aware of the CBC radio interview I did.
Yes.
In October 2019.
So for the Americans, CBC is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
So I had promised Gayle that somehow I would get the word out. I didn't know how. And again, happenstance, I was talking to a friend in Victoria who said, well, I have a very close friend who works for CBC Radio. Let me contact her and see if they'd be interested in this story. They immediately said they were interested on a Sunday morning program. I checked with Stefanie Green, his doctor, because I knew she was initially reluctant to talk about this, and I would not have gone ahead without her permission. And I waited a couple of weeks before Stefanie said, yes, go ahead. And at that point, an interview was set up with CBC Radio. So I had succeeded in that promise that I'd made to Gayle. I had succeeded in ways I couldn't even imagine. I also did something else. In Canada, what I would call the national newspaper is called the Globe and Mail. And they have a column called Lives Lived. And this column is supposed to be about people who had died within the past 6 months, ordinary people who in some way had been extraordinary. And so I wrote a column, sent it into Lives Lived, hoping they would publish it, again, to get the word out. And they did. And in that column, I was limited, I think, to 500 words. I don't remember. But I did, in the last paragraph, explain very clearly how Gayle died. And I remember saying something to the effect that although his sons and grandsons are his most precious legacy, that he did to make MAiD possible for people with dementia was probably his most important legacy. So I, right from the beginning, completely open with how he died.
Your mom has been pretty public. The podcast that she did is not the only time that she has spoken out about the way that he died, about the illness that he had.
Mm-hmm.
For yourself, have you been public about this?
The only way, because again, mom deserves a tremendous amount, because dad, I think one of his wishes was he wanted, if anyone is in a situation similar to his, for them to have the option. And I know he had communicated that to mom, and that's one reason mom had made such an effort. The only reason the only times I've done it publicly is actually with my law courses. I have played the CBC podcast for my students, and I tell them, and I go, just so you know, there's my mom, there's my dad, and the students are normally respectful, and it's weird whenever I play it, though my eyes water up, and I tell them, listen, I'm probably going to cry, just so you know, but I want you to know about this issue and to be aware of it. And I remember when my mom, I told her I did that the first time, she said, was that hard for you? And I go, well, not really, because if it gets the message out there more. And like I sent the link to the podcast to all my friends, of course, when it happened. But again, just to get the message out and options, just for people to have options and if they wish to end their life that way. And it's great because I actually did talk with the students, a lot of them, and many of them have had family members who have had Alzheimer's or dementia. And they were able to talk frankly. And yeah, some of them, I remember one student saying, I wish the final 2 years of my grandpa's life, I wish it hadn't happened. I wish he had done what your dad did, because those final 2 years really affected me.
It is now 3 years since Gayle died?
Yes, just a little more than 3 years, yes.
Can you tell me what the 3 years have been like and where things sit with you, with your family now?
I discovered how hard loneliness is. We'd been married for 51 years, essentially my adult life. And I discovered how hard it was to be alone. I missed him. I thought of him often, every day, certainly. There were times when I would want to share something with him, something that had happened maybe with our grandchildren or just something that had happened in my life. And he wasn't there to share it with. So my life has changed in ways that I couldn't have imagined.
And has the passage of those 3 years changed any of your thoughts or feelings about the manner in which Gayle died?
No, no. I'm grateful that this opportunity was open to him. I'm grateful that there were courageous doctors in Canada who were willing to take a chance to help him. I have had no regrets whatsoever about how he died or when he died. At the point when he died, his life had very little quality, but he was basically physically healthy. He had been a runner all his life. And I think that was one reason that he was basically healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no quality left.
Yeah.
No, I have never regretted that that was the choice that he made and that I fully supported.
I think I would say I mostly am in the same place. I don't think anything's I don't think anything's really drastically changed. I just I'm more aware of the Canadian legal system and how the laws are slowly changing. This is often through mom. So trying to follow those and be up to date. But no, personally, I would say no, I'm in the same place. And I know once in a while, my wife, maybe once a year, she'll say, "You're okay," like the anniversary of my dad's passing. And she thinks there may be a breakdown and I'll just fall apart maybe one time. But yeah, there hasn't been anything like that. I'm fortunate, comes back to. And if I ever do feel, maybe I do block those feelings thinking about how lucky I was given the life I've been given. I guess personally, like even the initial diagnosis and when it happened, I said this a couple times in the interview. I've had an incredibly fortunate life. I had the best dad ever for 45 years of my life. I don't know if I repeat that to myself to form a wall to maybe not be acknowledging how I'm really feeling, or yeah, there are moments, especially the holidays, where I won't lie, I'm a bit bitter. I go, damn, I wish my dad were here, or like my son's 10 years old, and thankfully he did see him and was able to play with him. But yeah, there's moments a bit of bitterness, jealousy, or I can remember one time, I have a friend whose dad's 85, smoking, drinking, and I'm going, sheesh, like I couldn't. But again, I don't believe, I guess, in dwelling on those negative emotions. And it all comes back to, I've had a dad for 45 years. I know my wife is, she was surprised how I wasn't grieving as much, but I think the ability to grieve with my family, because talking to friends who lost parents, they weren't able to say bye. We were able to say bye. That gave me closure. That's what I'm looking for. And my brothers, and that closure, we were so lucky to have that and incredibly fortunate. And that maybe makes it easy for me to reflect, hey, I had a dad for 45 years and there are tough moments. I still, I think, take on walks. I go on walks at night and I'll look up at the stars sometimes and just chat with him when I'm struggling with something. And his blood is within me. I tell my son, because he was struggling with a bit, and I go, well, Paul will always be with you because his blood is in me. It's in you. I don't know how you explain to a 10-year-old, maybe not the best job of doing it. But personally, I know some people expected me to react with more grieving, and I've learned everyone grieves in their own way. I would say my brothers and I have grieved differently too. But I just look back, hey, I was lucky to have this incredible dad. I can't complain, and I've been so lucky in my life, and I was blessed.
Yeah. You alluded to that your brothers going into this had somewhat different opinions about it. I'm curious where the three of you stand now.
Oh, we're all fine now with it. It was what dad wanted, and it was best for mom's well-being too. Yeah, none of us would change things. Obviously, dad not getting it, but no, none of us would change it.
Well, I'll tell you, this is a remarkable thing, a remarkable story for our American audience to hear this, because it is not, as you know, an option for Americans other than to get on a plane and fly to Switzerland.
Yep.
So I can tell you that we are grateful to have had your mother recount again what occurred, and for you now to add to this as well. We appreciate it.
I again, it's what my dad would have wanted. And yeah, hopefully I'm wondering if baby boomers are going to put more pressure on American lawmakers to make some changes.
You just heard part 2 of the story of Gayle Garlock. We would like to thank Geoff and Barbara for sharing Gayle's story with us. As both Geoff and Barbara said, it was Gayle's wish that his story be told. So we encourage you to share this podcast and continue the conversation in your community. The CBC radio piece mentioned in this podcast is linked in the episode description for further listening. Additionally, Barbara was kind enough to allow us to publicly share her diary during the time that Gayle was pursuing MAiD. Barbara's diary chronicles the process all the way up until the day Gayle died, and provides additional insight into what Barbara was thinking and experiencing as a wife and caregiver. Barbara's MAiD diary is available to read on the Completed Life Journal, which is also linked in this episode's description. If you would like to share a response to Gayle Garlock's story, please feel free to reach out to us on our social media platforms at Completed Life. Additionally, if you are interested in sharing your story of a completed life on this podcast, whether for yourself or a loved one, please reach out to us via email at info@completedlife.org. The goal of this podcast is to share end-of-life stories of all stripes to further weave together our collective understanding of what it means to live a completed life. This has been Voices of the Completed Life. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us at www.completedlife.org. That's completedlife.org, where you'll find extensive video content regarding resources on aid in dying, featuring discussions led by expert clinicians, bioethicists, policymakers, and end-of-life doulas. At the Completed Life Initiative, we advocate for a person's right to direct their own end-of-life care. Take control over your transition, your life, your choice.